Good evening and welcome to the January 2nd, 2018 regular meeting of the Mayor and City Council. First item on our agenda is the Pledge of Allegiance. I'm going to ask Senator Cheryl Kagan to come to the podium, and if everyone can please rise, Cheryl, lead us in the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Cheryl. Next item on our agenda is the reflection, and I am going to call for a moment of silence, but I did want to acknowledge a tragic situation that happened since the last time we've been here in our community. The CEO of the Montgomery Community Media, Merlin Reinecke, who has been a really excellent partner for the city since he's been in that position for the last few years, tragically took his own life shortly before Christmas, and it's just been a big blow to the community, enormous surprise and source of sadness for all of us who knew him and worked with him. And so I'd like us all to think of him as we take this moment of silence. Thank you. Next we have minutes, and the first set of minutes we have before us is from a work session held on July 10th, 2017. What is the pleasure of the council?
Going back to July 10th, I'll move approval of the minutes from the work session of July 10th.
Second.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, and Lorianne just walked in and she was not present at that meeting. Would you like to abstain?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so that carries 4-0 with one abstention, Councilmember Sales. Next, we have the work session from October 23rd. What is the pleasure of the council?
Move approval.
Second.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions?
Abstention.
Okay, so that carries the same way. 4-0 with one abstention, Councilmember Sales. Then we have the minutes from the regular meeting on November 20th. What is the pleasure of the council?
Move approval.
Could I just raise a picayune thing? Mr. Mayor, shouldn't you be listed at the top of the, just for future reference? I'll second the motion.
I don't know how
I think it looks like the
Excel
list
sets
is
it up, but-
done alphabetically. So.
Well, why would Ashman be last?
first.
No,
by
alphabetically by title.
But vice president
Okay,
would come
and
after
for each
each
category, everybody's listed alphabetically. So since you're the Mayor Ashman,
If staff could figure it out to put you at top, I think your position and stature warrants you being listed first.
So is this conditional? You're moving
No,
conditional?
I've already seconded the motion. It's
Okay.
just for future reference.
Okay, just checking. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, that carries 5-0. Next, we have the work session from Monday, December 11th. What's the pleasure of the council?
I'm afraid to move approval because of the alphabetical order. But I will anyway, move approval.
Second.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, carries 5-0. All right, so next we're going to move on to presentations and our proclamation for the day of service. So I would like to invite representatives from Seneca Creek Community Church and guys of Gaithersburg Middle School to join me at the podium. Happy New Year. Thanks again for being here. Okay. We are proud once again to issue a proclamation to honor the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and to encourage participation in a day of service on January 15th, 2018. which is 2 weeks from yesterday. Gaithersburg is joining with Montgomery Serves and Seneca Creek Community Church to host a morning of service projects that will benefit the most vulnerable in our community. More than 20 projects suitable for a variety of ages and skill levels will be conducted at the church on January 15. The Gaithersburg location, now in its 5th year, is one of 3 sites in Montgomery County that are hosting Day of Service activities. The others are in Rockville and Silver Spring. At last year's event, the guys of Gaithersburg Middle School volunteers packaged toiletries and sandwiches for those experiencing homelessness, and I know the council members and I spent some time there and enjoyed trying not to get in the way of all the good service that was going on ourselves. So, proclamation of the Mayor and City Council of Gaithersburg. Whereas the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. dedicated his life to the advancement of the fundamental principles of freedom, opportunity, and equal justice for all, and whereas Dr. King promoted nonviolence and compassion, and his leadership and vision continues to inspire millions of Americans who strive toward his dream of civil equality, and whereas Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Day honors Dr. King's legacy and provides an opportunity for reflection and action in keeping with his determination to eliminate discrimination and break down barriers to access and participation, and whereas Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Day encourages participation in a day of service that provides opportunities for volunteers to come together to help the community's most vulnerable, keeping with the spirit of Dr. King's message of nurturing an equitable and inclusive society. Now, therefore, I, Judd Ashman, by the power vested in me as Mayor of Gaithersburg, do hereby proclaim Monday, January 15, 2018, as a day of service in the city of Gaithersburg, to honor the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and encourage all residents to explore opportunities to engage in service projects that strengthen our community and foster a spirit of equality and inclusiveness, not only on Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Day, but throughout the year. Proclaim this second day of January 2018, signed by me, and let's give these gentlemen a great round of applause for receiving it. And if, I'll leave it open to you, if you'd like to say a few words, you're welcome to. You don't have to, but you are welcome.
I would just like to say I appreciate everything that the city of Gaithersburg does to come alongside us as we're honoring Dr. King in this special event. And so thank you, Mayor and City Council members. I know you've been there in the past and helped us out. And like you, I try to stay out of the way. It's a great experience. Invite you all to come out if you have some time on that day and join us.
It's really great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, please.
Thank you. I just want to say thank you to Grace Seneca Church for having us, and for the city of Gaithersburg for not only, having a wonderful city, but also funding our program. We appreciate it, and we want to make sure that we reciprocate that help. So we appreciate it. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, guys. So, we did have a second presentation on the agenda, but we're actually going to postpone that until the next opportune time. Yeah, well, we're going to do that during. We are actually, next is from the public. Are we doing? Let me just see. We have a new agenda system. I'm just getting used to reading it. So let me just see.
Public comments.
Yeah, next is public comments. Okay. So we are going to do the flags now. This is the time when the Mayor and Council like to hear from anybody in the public who'd like to speak on any topic other than what's on our public hearings agenda. We do have one public hearing item this evening, so if you're here to speak about that, just hold on. We ask that you keep your comments to no more than 3 minutes. State your name and address or neighborhood for the record. And when your time's down to 30 seconds, timer will beep and turn yellow. When your time's up, it'll beep and turn red. Who would like to be our first speaker? Please, come on up.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, Council Vice President, members of the City Council. Thank you for the opportunity to address you this evening. For the record, my name is Richard Rothrock. I'm the Government Relations Manager for Crown Castle, and I oversee deployment of our small cell and DAS facilities in Maryland, Virginia, and the District of Columbia on behalf of our customers. We were in front of you on December 18th to voice our concerns regarding the adoption of the amendments to Ordinances 19, 20, and 24 and the regulations for installations in the right-of-way, and continue to oppose those regulations as adopted. We do appreciate the time and effort that went into developing these regulations, as well as the time and effort that staff has put into preparing the draft distributed antenna system and small cell franchise agreement and master license agreement for attachments for licensor facilities, of which the templates will be in front of you this evening. Nevertheless, as we outlined in our letter dated December 18th, and again in our letter dated January 2nd, Crown Castle has a number of concerns with specific provisions within each agreement that individually or together could hinder Crown Castle's ability to provide public service to the City of Gaithersburg. First, the franchise appears to enact a ban on placement of new wireless facilities in the right-of-way. As we discussed in our previous comments on the city's proposed small cell regulations, prohibiting the installation of new wireless support structures will make it impossible for carriers to design their networks to ensure adequate services for the area. Also, the various fee provisions that are outlined in the franchise and the license agreement need clarification, and as drafted are open for interpretation. It is unclear whether the fees outlined in the franchise are on a per-node basis or a one-time fee. Applying these fees on a per-node basis would result in heavy fees and would be extremely burdensome. Likewise, the fees in the license agreement need clarification. We ask that you please delay the vote on these templates and allow us to continue to work alongside you, city staff, and the community to develop an agreement that we can all be proud of. Thank you again for your time this evening.
Thank you. Do we have any other public comments this evening? Yeah, come on. Sydney, you might as well come up too.
Not yet.
Oh, you're doing
We've
so.
orchestrated this, actually.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's been orchestrated. Whoa.
Okay, with the props. Happy New Year, good evening, Mayor and Council, to new council member Sales, congratulations. For the record, I'm Cheryl Kagan. It's my great honor to be the senator for Gaithersburg and Rockville, and to be a municipal superstar once again this year. I thought I'd come before we move back to Annapolis and get started in our 90-day session and give a quick overview of my legislative agenda, and then I'm bringing up Council Members Katz to do a quick presentation to you all. So I hope this clock starts slowly, because I'm going to have a long legislative agenda.
I'm not doing
Okay. I'm going to cruise through it. I want to give the residents of Gaithersburg, anyone watching, and all of you, an idea of what we're going to be working on, or what I'm going to be working on this year. First off, I will continue to work on 911 legislation. As you all have heard me say over the years, I have had 2 constituents die when 911 failed. I have recently learned of a third one that died in AstraZeneca MedImmune because of the insufficient and inadequate geolocating information that was available to our 911 first responders. So I am coming in. It looks like with 4 bills that would affect 911, we're breaking it into pieces, and I've already met with the chairman. He's very aware of what we're working on. And MACO, the Maryland Association of Counties, is my partner, close partner, in one of the bills, and the chairman is going to co-sponsor it with me. We're hoping to make progress as we move towards next generation 911. For viewers who may not be aware of this, in a lot of the country, about 25 to 30% of the country, people can text to 911. So if there's a bad guy in your house, currently in Gaithersburg, you can't text. You've got to pick up the phone and you've got to say, hi, there's a bad guy in my house, and I live at 123 Main Street. That's crazy in these days when we're all so used to texting. Frederick County is the only jurisdiction in Maryland where you can text to 911. Montgomery County is moving in that direction. I don't think we're moving quite quickly enough. There are issues around funding, recruitment, retention, training, and many, many other things that I've been working on. And I've traveled the state, and I have partners all over in working with that. I think you all know that the Public Information Act needs reform. I have been partnering with the Maryland Municipal League and the Maryland Association of Counties. I believe that we'll have 2 or maybe 3 proposals to reform our Public Information Act. There's a balance that needs to be struck between transparency and privacy. We want both. And so if someone signs up for a Montgomery alert or something through Gaithersburg, they do not want their name, email, phone number, or God forbid, even their social security number disclosed as to follow our current laws. And so we're going to modify that to give people a little more privacy so they decide to continue to engage with government. That also is going to affect body cameras. We're working on legislation with folks about that, as well as 911. Once there are texts, photos, and videos, which is the way we're going, not all of that information should be available to the press and to public. Polystyrene, which has been banned by Gaithersburg, finally a couple of weeks ago by Rockville, and by Montgomery, Prince George's counties, D.C., and about 135 other jurisdictions around the country, is not yet banned statewide in Maryland. So I am bringing that bill back. Delegate Kumar Barve, our own delegate, is the chairman of the House Committee, and we're hoping that he will come on board and help us take action to ban polystyrene, which is styrofoam. It doesn't biodegrade. Don't ever nuke your leftover Chinese food in the styrofoam container. It emits chemicals that are carcinogenic. It also doesn't break down in our landfills, in our waterways. The fish eat it, and then we eat the fish. It's just bad all around. And so Gaithersburg had the wisdom to ban it a while ago, and we are hoping to make that statewide. I continue to be what I fancy myself to be the senator for the nonprofit sector. I just won a wonderful award, actually, for my leadership there. We're going to be bringing back another important bill to support the nonprofit sector, to help them guarantee to get some overhead support when they get state grants or contracts. So we're working on that to imitate some of new legislation at the federal level. Private school discrimination, I think, is not okay if you take state money. And so we're going to continue to work with teachers and others on that. Election laws, I'm on the committee that deals with education, environment, ethics, healthcare, and a number of other things, including our elections. And I have a few different proposals that I'm working on with colleagues, including ranked choice voting. It's also called instant runoff voting, and some other time I'd be happy to explain that in greater depth for people who haven't yet heard about it, but that's also in place in Tacoma Park and in a lot of places around the country. I think Montgomery County should continue to consider that as a next step. Also international observers, trying to lighten the load on our county elections folks and city folks, actually. The state song was talked about a few years ago, and I had a bill. Jenny Forehand, my predecessor, talked about the state song. She was a little bit ahead of her time, but as Confederate statues have fallen, as people are tired of hearing about Confederates and their monuments and thinking that that represents the days of old, we have a state song in Maryland that calls Abraham Lincoln a tyrant and a despot and talks disparagingly about values that we hold dear. And so I'm bringing my bill back this year, and we'll see whether we have more progress in moving forward on that. I've talked about language access. Gaithersburg is one of the most linguistically diverse cities in the nation, and I noticed that about 86% of our state government websites were monolingual. I thought that was wrong, and so I've enacted a statewide language access bill. The Hogan administration read it very narrowly and wasn't as compliant as I thought they should have been. We're bringing back a fix to make it abundantly clear that state government websites should be able to be read for free in any language that is spoken by at least 0.5% of Maryland residents. And that's notwithstanding international businesses and tourists and all that. We want to be welcome to all, and I think it's important symbolically as well as for economic development and inclusion. Highway user revenue and small cell towers are going to be on the agenda, certainly in my committee and elsewhere, and I look forward to partnering with the Maryland Municipal League. And I thank you, Councilmember Spiegel and Lindford and others in Gaithersburg who are so involved in the Municipal League, and for your leadership. The last couple things I just want to talk about, personally, not as a senator, but I am hosting once again an inaugural concert for anybody who is interested in hearing about that. There are 5 performers on January 20th. Once again, the night that we had an inauguration last year, and we're talking about raising money for hunger, health care, immigration, climate change, and sexual assault organizations. And so there are 5 worthy organizations. If you're interested, inaugural, 2 N's, on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and the website, inaugural.org. You can follow me on all of those on social media. Stay in touch with me during the legislative session, CherylKagan.org. And please come to Annapolis to come visit anytime during the legislative session from mid-January, next Wednesday, through about mid-April. And District 17 night, as you all know, is going to be Monday, January 29th. And so we encourage residents of Gaithersburg to come down and visit us. You can watch the Senate and the House in session, have a little dinner on us, and take a tour. So we'd love to have you join us. So with that, I'd like to ask Councilmember Sidney Katz to come and join me, because thanks to your wonderful staff, I was able to tour the police station and the new building, which I will be proudly carrying as a bond bill to get state funding for renovation, expansion, and upgrade. I think that's terrific. Always have to give the shout out to Monica Marquina, your legislative liaison, who does tremendous work. And so Dennis Enslinger and Monica Marquina and I toured the site, and one of the things that I noticed was that the flag, the state flag, in front of the police headquarters and in front of City Hall were in great disrepair. They were faded and they were tattered, as were the counties. So tonight I am here to proudly present you with 2 new state flags for those 2 buildings.
Let's all go down and accept it.
Okay. And
Thank you, and as you're coming
Aren't you
down,
going to
I'm
tell
actually
us all the
presenting.
things you're going to do for us, too?
Yeah, believe me, I'm doing all. Who do you think gave her those ideas for what she said? but also, we're presenting Montgomery County flags. Now, I have to tell you, when Cheryl called and told me that we were going to be doing this, I don't know how many of you watch The Big Bang Theory, but Sheldon does a thing called Fun with Flags. So that's what we're doing, right? Fun with flags, right? Yeah, fun with flags. Yeah.
We'll take one out, one of each out, and let's. What's that?
It's very tough there. We've gone to the county.
So, Doris, I should say, if folks aren't aware of this, it's not on.
The state flag is
Yeah,
also
folks.
there.
Doris,
Anyway,
is that for TV or?
No, is it on? It's not, it doesn't seem to be on.
No.
That's okay. Anyway, I can just speak. So if folks aren't aware of this, Maryland is regularly voted to have the most beautiful state flag in the country, and kind of obvious, right? It's beautiful and different, and we're proud of it, and the one flying well. And sorry, okay, so I
And I was
got
going to
to
say,
take a picture.
and also, Montgomery County has often been voted as the prettiest flag for Montgomery County. And
Okay, let's look over here.
Thank you.
got it, Nick? All right.
Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you. Thank you. Fair pleasure. Thank you. Good to see you. I don't know where you want the other flag. You go back down.
Yeah.
Is he a state flag?
Yeah. While we regroup, I will point out
Yeah.
that the city flag is very straight to the point about what this is. This is Gaithersburg, this is our logo, and this is who we are. So,
right.
just want to point that out. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good night. Thank you.
That was fun with flags. Next, we're going to move on to our public hearing. And Diane is going to lead us in our discussion about our benchmarking program. And we have Lindsay Shaw, the Commercial Energy Program Manager from Montgomery County Department of Environmental Affairs. Welcome.
Good evening, Mayor Ashman, council members. I'm going to start with a brief overview and then move on to the state of benchmarking in the country before I move on to Montgomery County's benchmarking law particulars. the applicability for our city, and what has been done with property owner notification, before moving on to time frame and next steps. So why do we benchmark? We're looking to reduce energy consumption and energy costs, also improve our local air quality and reduce our community's carbon footprint. As you can see, the building sector is responsible for a large percentage of energy consumption. The United States spends over $400 billion a year on energy for buildings. This discussion relates to the Environmental Affairs Committee recommended the city opt into the county's benchmarking law during last year's annual update to the mayor and council. As you can see, over 26 cities do require benchmarking in the United States currently. This is functioning as a strategy to enable market transformation to support energy conservation and efficiency efforts. Moving on to the requirements for Montgomery County. This involves both public and certain non-residential buildings that would be 50,000 square feet and over. In order to perform the benchmarking, you can use Energy Star Portfolio Manager, which is a free tool. The sustainability coordinator for the city would benchmark the city's one facility, the activity center, initially. There's a planned energy software purchase in the future that would make the upload of data more automatic in future years. Okay, so verification of data. The city's Facilities and Capital Projects Division Chief is a certified energy manager and meets the data verification requirement for the city. This is required under the law to do the data verification. I know I mentioned this in the last, during the last discussion and presentation on benchmarking. The purpose is to ensure data quality and compliance, and it can be done in-house or by a third party. And moving on, these are some of the most popular credentials used by the county for data verifiers. And I mentioned we do have a certified energy manager on staff. And let's see. There are exemption and waiver criteria for certain property. The onus is on the building owner to submit to the county why they believe they should have an exemption or a waiver. Now, in terms of applicability for Gaithersburg, as I briefly mentioned, the city would be required to benchmark and report on the activity center. It would require property owners of non-residential buildings, 50,000 square feet and greater, to benchmark and report the energy usage, which would also be third-party verified. The county would prepare an annual report each year, and the data isn't disclosed the first year, it's disclosed the second year. And the county has mentioned to us that we would be able to receive the city-specific data. And the Institute for Market Transformation has also mentioned to the city they'd be willing to help us with some of the data analysis and support us there. This map shows the current list of properties. It's approximately 119 covered buildings, including the activity center. That would fall under the requirements of the law. And on the previous slide, this would be updated as there would be new tax data by the time that the city were to opt into the law. Moving on to property owner notification. We have done public notice on the city website. Postcards were mailed to the identified on that previous GIS slide, those identified property owners of the hearing tonight and the public record open time period. There was a notice in the county energy newsletter, and also a presentation was made to the Economic Development Committee. Following adoption, there would be a mail out in February of 2019 of a rather large packet of information, similar to what you had received at the last, during the last presentation. The county does offer open office hours for additional information, and there is the opportunity for extra support for churches. And these are the time frame of the next steps. This was introduced on December 4th, 2017. Public notice was presented on the city website on December 5th. Tonight is the public hearing, January 2nd. The record will be closing on January 26th, with final action scheduled or planned for February 20th. And the submission data deadline, should we opt in, would be June 1st of 2019. And that's all I have.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your work in this, making the presentation, also following up on those questions about the sharing of data. I know that those questions came up earlier, so thank you for that. Before we go to the public, do we have any questions from the dais here, or minor comments?
The only question I have is whether the planning commission has weighed in on this at all, has an opinion on this.
No, it has not been presented to the planning commission.
Is there a reason why they might,
Maybe
why we
Lynn,
might not want to hear from them?
Do you want to?
I mean, it would not be required to go to the planning commission
Sure.
because it's not an amendment of chapter 24.
But the impact of this is actually pretty significant on developers, builders, et cetera, property owners. So that's why I'm asking whether or not we perhaps should share it with them.
So could I weigh in for 1 second? This was brought up and discussed quite a bit at the Economic and Business Development Committee, which there are a number of representatives from the commercial real estate sector, and they were all generally, well, not just generally, they were unanimously in favor of this as a money saver for businesses and very low cost, in most cases no cost at all, because there are already people on staff who are working on this. It provides a method for companies to make sure that they're being as energy efficient and basically cost efficient as possible. So I don't really see this as a burden based on that discussion. I was concerned going into the discussion that this was yet another potentially onerous burden on the business community here, but quite the opposite was the response that we had from that community.
Yeah, I'm not surprised by that reaction and response and support from the Economic Development Committee and developers. So given our experience before, it's just, we asked the Planning Commission to look at a lot of things that have an impact on economic development as well as development throughout the city. So I just thought it might be useful to have their opinion, but it's nothing that would change my position on this.
Any other questions or comments before?
The only comment I have is looking at the proposed ordinance draft. My first reaction was, where's the rest of it? It's the shortest ordinance draft I've ever seen, because all we're doing is saying we're adding one other piece of county legislation that we're opting into.
Correct.
So it's the most succinct piece of ordinance legislation I have seen in my 3 years on the council. I appreciate that.
I was just wondering, I saw that you advertised.
I can go back to the slide. The time frames.
Yeah. You advertised in the county newsletter? Was that the only place the advertisement was for the
Also
hearing?
on the city website. The city website was the formal public notice. And then Lindsay Shaw is here with Montgomery County, and I believe it's a weekly newsletter or monthly?
It's a monthly newsletter. It's the commercial energy news that goes out to approximately 1,500 subscribers. So that went out noting the public hearing date today, when the record's open until the final action expected date, to let folks know the deadlines that are coming up.
Plus the mailer directly.
Right.
Correct.
To the business.
Yeah.
Okay.
Correct.
But do you ever use the local newspapers, the Town Courier, the Crier?
For public
honestly-
hearings, I can answer that.
Go
Diane.
ahead.
For public hearings, and so can Lynn, it used to be the Gazette. It used to be, there's a long history of legislation sort of putting on the table where we're legally required to advertise. I think we still have some responsibility. Lynn, you want to?
Yeah, the state law changed, don't remember exactly, but about 3 or 4 years ago, that allowed municipalities to advertise most of its legal notices on your website, provided you gave notification to your residents that that's how you're going to do it. There are still a few exemptions, mostly under Chapter 24, which is the zoning ordinance. For some types of planning matters, we do still are required to publish ads in the local newspaper. You know, unfortunately, with the demise of the Gazette, we had we do advertise when we're required to. I'm not sure that anyone
Usually we're doing
sees
the
it.
Washington Post
Yeah.
these days.
Yeah, the
Yes.
Washington Post.
Yeah.
I didn't know if we did any local.
Yeah,
Well,
because generally the smaller, like the Town Courier, aren't a newspaper of general circulation in the entire city, and I think that's where it doesn't meet the legal requirements.
Oh, okay. And then I saw that there's supposed to be support for churches. Does that mean it's like a
Correct.
sliding fee that they
I
would have to?
believe it's technical support, but
Oh.
Shaw could answer that.
Thank you. This past year, we've offered a pro bono benchmarking and verification pilot program that was
Okay.
fairly successful. There are congregations, nonprofits, and not affordable housing, but those two groups that might have a harder time finding the expertise to get the benchmarking and verification requirements completed. So we have a list of benchmarking ambassadors who have volunteered their time to help people out to understand the benchmarking law and help them benchmark. And so we had a select group of those folks say, I'm willing to help out the nonprofits in Montgomery County, make sure they meet this requirement. And we had about 7 verifiers help out about 10 properties this past year comply.
And do you have a FAQ page?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And we would do the same thing if,
Correct, Montgomery County would be running our program.
okay. All right. Thank you.
So were there any churches that are over 50,000 square feet in Gaithersburg?
That's a good
I
question.
can't think of any.
Not in the city.
Well, it's the whole
Right.
building, so,
Yeah.
you know, there are some big buildings.
Especially if there are multiple buildings on one tax parcel that add up to 50,000 square
Okay.
feet.
Got it.
But I can look at the list more closely and see if there are congregations on there.
Did we hear back from any of the 119? percent?
Not thus far.
But the record's still open till
Yeah.
whenever.
We may hear from them
whenever
right
they
now.
decide.
Oh, is it also included in the economic development newsletter that goes out?
I don't believe it has been, but that's not to say it couldn't be.
Okay. 'Cause I know it goes to a lot of existing.
Is that duly noted, Tom Lonergan? Okay.
We could just send Mr. Lonergan door to door, 119 of them. Just kidding.
So, with that, unless anybody has anything more, I will put it out to the public. This is the time of the mayor and council. Love to hear from anybody in the public who'd like to speak on this topic. We ask that you keep your comments to 3 minutes or less. State your name and address or neighborhood for the record. Do we have any speakers on this topic this evening? Not seeing any. Well, for anybody who's watching or who later hears about this, we are going to have an open record for some time. Staff has suggested until January 26th, so we will consider your written testimony just as we would your oral testimony.
Can I ask one
Yes,
last question,
please.
just to clarify? There is no fee by the county for this service to the buildings, right?
Correct.
No.
So this is.
Nor to the city.
So this is an example of something where the county is doing this really as a service to the community rather than as a revenue generator in any way.
Correct.
All right, good, thank you.
That's good, because I think what part of the case is that all the benefits accrue to the building owners if they can improve their energy efficiency through this benchmarking.
And to the planet.
The planet as well, so, you know, it's part of our climate action plan.
That said,
I will move that the record stay open until January 26, 2018.
Second.
all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that carries unanimously. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next on our agenda is from the mayor and council, and we're going to start with Ryan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I don't have too much this evening. First, I want to wish everybody a very happy New Year. It's cold outside, but hopefully the holidays and the celebrations were warm with family and friends with all of you, and looking forward to a productive year. Senator Kagan already mentioned some of the priorities of the Maryland Municipal League during her presentation tonight. I just wanted to remind everyone, in case you haven't been focused like a laser on the General Assembly session that's about to start in Annapolis, like some of us are sort of required to do for our job. January 10th is the first day of the legislative session in Annapolis this year. 2018 is an election year for our state legislators and our governor. which is a good opportunity for us to remind them that they can take up the cause of Gaithersburg's priorities and municipalities' priorities throughout the state. And we're going to be working very hard at the Maryland Municipal League with our leadership and our members for municipalities throughout the state to push for our legislative priorities. There will be an opening reception, as is tradition, on the night of the first day of session, where municipal officials, not only from Gaithersburg, but from throughout the state, will have an opportunity to network with the state legislators and talk to them about these issues. And we're looking forward to that opportunity and many other opportunities during the session to be advocates of our residents and businesses and their concerns. The Maryland Municipal League is also about to launch a couple of video public service announcements, which I hope the city will circulate on its YouTube channel and maybe on our television broadcasts to educate folks about what the Maryland Municipal League's priorities are, why we have these priorities, and how you, as residents, as business owners, can help us achieve these priorities so that you're not getting double taxed for the maintenance of your roads and sidewalks, so that we're getting our fair share of money from Annapolis to deal with transportation infrastructure, so that we are maintaining home rule and local authority where appropriate to regulate our rights of way, and so that we can encourage folks, as Senator Kagan said, to sign up for our electronic newsletters and our emergency alert systems, rather than discouraging them from doing so if they know that they will be subject to Public Information Act requests. So stay tuned for a lot more on those statewide legislative priorities and our efforts to advocate in the next few months during the session. We will keep you posted, but it's going to be a very busy time and a very important time for not only us up here, but for really all of you out there to be engaged and make sure that you are contacting your General Assembly members and telling them how you feel about these issues so that they will take the action that we think they should. And then finally, just wanted to thank again Senator Kagan and Councilmember Katz for being here tonight. Appreciated their presentation. Appreciated their fine gift of new state flags and county flags. I think the reason why the flags in Gaithersburg are a little bit worn is because we get a lot of use out of them. We work hard to build relationships with our county and state counterparts to make sure that we're all working for you. So we're looking forward to putting those new flags up. But I think it's sort of a nice symbolic reflection of the way we all work together.
Well done. Neil.
Thank you. I also like to echo the Happy New Year greetings. I had a great holiday personally. I got to spend some great time with my 2 daughters, 2 grandchildren, son-in-law, sister, her 2 kids, and new grandchild as well. So, as well as some old friends and new friends as well. So that's the way we're supposed to spend our holiday, aside from just shivering in our houses. I also had a chance to attend a little event celebrating the Humane Society's success at working with the county government at passing legislation banning some forms of animal acts coming through the county on the basis of some of the wild animals in particular are not always treated very humanely, and that's been an issue. So the county has passed that legislation. We expect to see draft legislation here at the city and have a chance for us to have an open discussion of whether or not we want to opt in or create our own legislation. Also had a chance to meet with some representatives from the Montgomery County Agricultural Fair, representing the agricultural community, who have some concerns about this in terms of its impact both on the county fair's ability to bring in wild animal acts, as well as their a larger concern that there's maybe a hidden agenda here to ban meat products altogether, which I'm pretty sure is not really the agenda, certainly not my agenda, but at any rate, we can look forward to having that discussion and seeing where we decide to go in terms of following or modifying what the county has done or not at all. And lastly, at the State Highway Authority's roadshow several months ago, among the issues that were raised by me was an issue that has been ongoing from the Rosemont community, which is half in Gaithersburg and half, sadly, not quite in Gaithersburg, where the road noise from the I-370 interchange toward Route 355 has been increasing thanks to the increased usage of the intercounty connector Route 200. Unfortunately, the state's response that came to us in a letter a couple of weeks ago was exactly the same as we've heard before, which is that because they conducted noise projections in 1985 and measurements in 1994, 2004, and 2005, that the noise was not sufficient to result in any noise amelioration for the community. The fact that the ICC didn't open until 2010 seems a little, to make that response a little odd to me, so I've continued to try to escalate this at State Highway and see if there's something that can be done. I personally went out last year with a noise meter, and it seems that the decibel level is much higher than legally, but there's some technical reasons why the state does not technically have to do additional noise studies and provide some abatement, but hopefully we'll get past technicalities and try to do the right thing for those neighbors. So to be continued, I'm sure. That's it for me tonight. Thank you.
Thanks, Neil. Lorianne.
Yes. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to 2018. I enjoyed a very quiet and relaxing new year with my family. It was very special. My daughter came home for the holidays from college, so it's always good to see the kids back home. It brings energy back into the house. It's not so quiet anymore, and lots of drop-offs and pickups have resumed. So sorry for my lateness this evening. I enjoyed attending the Wells Robertson holiday dinner a few days after our last the next night after our council meeting, our last council meeting. And it was fun meeting some of the residents there and hearing about their stories of recovery and meeting some of their mentors. So it's good to see that our residents at the Wells Robertson House have many circles of support around them to help them through the difficult journey of recovery. I heard about the fire, a small fire that happened at the Potomac Oaks Senior Center. 12 families were displaced, but luckily there weren't any serious injuries. So I really appreciate the mayor bringing that to our attention, and our community service staff, police, public safety workers, and everything they did to respond and support those families and the residents there. The Board of Elections, they're having their meeting tomorrow to talk about the last election, and if you have any comments or suggestions or recommendations to improve the process of our elections, we have one coming up in 2 years, feel free to send in your comments or join the meeting. They'll be presenting their findings on February 12th, so be on the lookout for that. And I'm looking forward to participating in this year's Day of Service event, and hopefully we'll be able to work with Seneca Creek to have a voter registration table there as well this year. So that's it for me.
Thank you. Mike.
Oh, well, I'll echo the best wishes for a Happy New Year. I hope everybody was able to enjoy the holidays with their family and friends, spend some time relaxing and perhaps reflecting both on 2017 and the future in 2018. So again, as Lorianne said, last year a number of us, well, the Day of Service for the city will be in cooperation with Seneca Creek Community Church. Last year a number of us were participants there, mostly just staying out of the way, but we actually did fill bags and things like that.
We did some stuff.
We did some stuff, right? But it was great. It was a great turnout from the community. That's not the only way that you can observe the Day of Service in memory of Dr. King. But that's the official one that the city does. So I hope we'll see you there, or you hope to take the opportunity to find another way to serve your community. And then also the fire that Lorianne described wasn't actually so little. It actually destroyed 2 buildings and 12 units. So I want to thank, first of all, Montgomery County Fire and Rescue, the Gaithersburg Police Department, and Montgomery County Police for their quick response. The fire started in the attic, and I imagine that the horror of waking up to smoke detectors blaring. No one was hurt. That's a relief, but several families lost everything. At least one family had no insurance at all. So it's a combination of renters and homeowners that lost their homes. And then, the Red Cross of National Capital Region has been very helpful with the evacuees and the people those families that were displaced, and finding them temporary residences and helping them get back on their feet, as well as our community relations team here at the city. So we'll be helping out as much as the city is able to in terms of recovery and reconstruction there. And the role of the city is to make sure that that new buildings are safe. We do that by code inspection and enforcement, figure out what caused the fire so it doesn't happen again. And I know that our staff are going to be on top of that. They've already been helping quite a bit. So you never know what kind of services you have until you need them. And we found out that the services of Montgomery County and our city are good, efficient, strong, reliable. They're committed to their job. They put their lives on the line when they go into a fire like that. So we all appreciate what they did, and we hope that incidents like that are few and far between. But when they occur, we do know that we have reliable and committed people to do that work, men and women, that we can thank every day. That's it for me.
Thanks, Rob.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to echo the wish that everyone have a happy and prosperous new year. Happy New Year to everybody. And pretty much everything that's been said, I echo as well. I remember last year, Mr. Mayor, yourself, Mike and I went to the Seneca Creek Community Church, as well as a lot of our staff. I was amazed by how many members of our staff actually gave of their weekend to come and to give back to the community. Encourage residents to come down to the church for the day of service. It's a great event. I'm going to bring my family, so I hope to see you there. I know in the next few weeks we're going to have a lot of time in Annapolis, as Senator Kagan mentioned. Next Wednesday is opening day for the legislative session. I think a lot of us are going to go down there. And so this is the time of year that we get to focus our legislators on our priorities. So it'll be a great time for you. Thank you.
Thanks, Rob. Again, Happy New Year to everyone. Glad Lorian and Mike brought up the situation with Potomac Oaks. We will be keeping an eye on that for sure. And just one quick announcement that next week we'll be participating in an off-site work session, which starts earlier than usual. It'll be at 6:30 p.m. at Manna Food Center, which is 9311 Gaither Road in Gaithersburg, to receive a presentation by the Gaithersburg Coalition of Providers and Contracted Grantees. To put it simpler, it's our nonprofit community that we work with all the time to provide the vast majority of the social services in the city. It's really, we did this offsite last year. It's really a good meeting for anybody who wants to learn all about the social services that go on and how we work with our nonprofits. It's recommended to go. For more information, including the agenda, visit the city's website, gaithersburgmd.gov, or contact the city manager's office at 301-258-6310. And we will move on to From the City Manager.
Thanks, Mayor. Just a few items. I've mentioned a couple of times that MCPS has been working on a site location committee to construct another elementary school in the Gaithersburg cluster. We went through a process and a couple of sites rose to the top, which I'm still not at liberty to discuss, but they are bringing in some concepts, which means they feel more serious than it was previously. I've already passed the word along to the construction staff that really only so far staff can take this, that they're going to need to come before the city council and probably their board as well. But it'll be interesting to see how they fit a school on the two sites that have risen to the top, and hopefully this will trickle back to you guys soon. The chief, I believe, promised that they would get all body-worn cameras deployed by the end of 2017, and they just made it. All all officers are now, have completed their training and are deploying body-worn cameras effective first of the year. So congratulations for them to stay on track and get all their training done. It was quite a comprehensive program.
Oh, yeah.
And still some variables about what you do with the data, et cetera, but they're at least deployed at this time.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry that someone saw a tattered flag in front of our buildings, but we did in fact replace all the flags a couple of weeks ago, so you probably shouldn't see any more of that for a while. We'll put these in inventory, according to Public Works. We'll put these in inventory and they'll move back up when we need to, probably in the next couple of months.
Okay. Thank you very much. Move on to our economic development update with Tom Lonigan.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, everybody. Just wanted to give you a brief overview of the commercial office market in Gaithersburg over the past year. According to our data in CoStar, the online subscription service through which we track about 8.5 million square feet of commercial office and flex space here in the city, we're beginning 2018 from a slightly better position than we did starting last year. Direct Class A and B office and flex space vacancy in the city is down to 6.8%, and when you add in the available sublets, that number rises to only 7.4%. A year ago, these numbers stood closer or slightly above 8%. Not bad, especially when compared to other nearby submarkets, or when compared to where we were just a few years ago. Back in 2009, the vacancy rate was over 20%, and as recently as 2015, it was still over 10%. That said, 2017 was certainly a softer year for office lease-ups than we had seen in the prior 2 years, reflecting a trend seen both regionally and nationally. Direct asking rents are up to an average of just over $23 a foot, up from the 5-year average of about $21. Empty space remained on the market for an average of 20 months, down significantly from the 5-year average of 26. Comparably speaking, we're doing pretty well. Countywide, the office vacancy rate stands at about 14%, Rockville 10, Germantown nearly 14, Silver Spring 10.5, but asking rents there are closer to $30 a foot. Retail vacancy rate increased slightly last year by about 1% to 3.9%, still very low by historic standards. The increase in the vacancy rate there can likely be attributed to Lake Forest Mall, the former Sports Authority space, and turnover at Kentlands Market Square. Lab space, of course, remains a premium in the market, with vacancy rates in the low single digits and commanding rents up to $34 a foot, which is very impressive. We'd love to take all the credit, of course, for this success over the past year, but can't and won't. But I'll say the Toolbox program, the city's support, and reputation for doing business certainly has played a role. For certain challenges do remain. Office tenants are typically not driven by municipal boundaries when selecting sites, so with higher vacancy rates and lower rents in nearby areas, rents will likely remain compressed. Rents have risen, but unless or until they rise more, we're unlikely to see new office construction. Despite nearly having 700,000 feet of office and flex space available in the city for rent, there are still few large contiguous blocks of good space available for companies growing within or relocating to Gaithersburg. And finally, unless more lab space is built in the city, we will be unable to attract and retain good growing biotechs. We pledge to keep up the good fight in 2018 and hopefully keep those numbers moving in the right direction. Secondly, and finally, just a mention about Tommy Joe's restaurant. As you may have heard, the Tommy Joe's restaurant location in the Kentlands has closed its doors for good, prompting some questions and concerns about the future of the space. We did reach out to Saul Centers earlier today, which owns and leases the space, for comment. We were told that Saul is actively marketing the space. Tommy Joe's does have a lease in place, but Saul has no intention of leaving an empty restaurant in the Kentlands. The location has generated, quote, a lot of interest. Saul could not state a specific timeline in which a new tenant would be in place, but stated that it was likely to be sooner rather than later. And a lease with a new tenant will address numerous details, and all parties, including the current tenant, Tommy Joe's, will be involved. In other words, there's a lot of moving parts, but they'll keep us posted.
Thank you for that update.
Sure.
Question?
Go ahead.
More of a comment really than a question, because I don't want to put you on the spot about this one, Tom, but I was chatting with Tony recently about the fact that a number of neighborhoods in the city have just recently received their new assessments from the County Department of Finance for property taxes. And I was just kind of curious. I know it's very early days at this point as we digest the news, but curious if staff could start looking at that and giving us just a very kind of back of the envelope impression of what this means for city revenues and budgeting coming up. I know you're going to be doing that anyway.
You're talking about Tony's favorite thing to do.
Yeah. So I don't know if you. I'm not going to ask you to comment unless you feel you want to comment about it from an economic development perspective or from a city budget perspective. But I did just want to raise the issue because, as I mentioned to Tony, I noticed fairly significant, not dire, but fairly significant change in assessments for some portions of the city.
Yeah, we've just begun an informal. There are two different ways we get the data. Tom will collect commercial data just prior to the planning retreat, which is all the commercial spaces on one spreadsheet. That has been stable to down, I guess, for a couple of years. But from residential, we pull bills and we just kind of compare them to previous years. But we also get an analysis from the state for the entire base, which we have not received yet, but we'll be getting very soon.
Mike, what were you going to say?
Well, actually, that was one of the things I was going to bring up. So, but I'm glad that staff are on it already, and good that Brian brought it all to our attention. I was just going to point out that the Tommy Joe's site, formerly the O'Donnell site, was a very successful locally based restaurant for years, family owned for years. It's a great site. What I hope we'll see there is a company, whether it's local or national chain, that actually has done the research on the market in Kentlands and in Gaithersburg in general, and brings us something that's a good match for the community, because it's not a cursed site. I think we had a restaurateur that perhaps had different expectations for what could happen there, and so. But I hope it's not empty very long. So.
Nor do we.
All right, thank you, Tom. Appreciate it. Next, we have staff guidance, and Lynn is going to lead us through that.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. We have with us this evening Jerry Lederer. Unfortunately, Joe Van Eaton had some unexpected health issues, so could not be with us tonight. He had surgery. Maybe you can tell him better, but I know he's home, or he's doing better.
Just tell us he's going to be okay.
Just okay.
He's going to be okay.
Oh, good.
He's going to be okay, and we hope that he's going to be okay faster than we had originally anticipated.
That's great.
Good.
But Jerry is with the same law firm and has assisted in the preparation of our documents, as well as I think is both locally and nationally known for a lot of presentations he does regarding the small cell industry. As the Mayor and Council are aware, we have seen several drafts of agreements related to franchises for use of the city's public rights of way. The last presentation on December 18th, the Mayor and Council had several comments. Staff considered those comments. We also considered the letter that we received from Wiley Wren, the law firm that is representing Crown Castle. And staff working with outside counsel has updated both the franchise agreement and the master license agreement to reflect those comments. I will be very honest to say, when we looked at the industry comments, we accepted some of their changes, but not all of their changes. We did follow the Mayor and Council's comments, though, so we did include your changes. As you know, that this is part of a comprehensive review of use of our public rights of way. You previously approved both ordinances and regulations, which will go into effect on January 7th. So we have before us this evening the template agreements, and I do want to stress that these are templates. It is anticipated that we will have some negotiation with our industry partners as they come in and request franchise agreements, and those agreements will come back to you all in a more developed and negotiated form when they come back. I do want to just touch on the significant changes to the agreements. Obviously we cleaned up some of the language, but with the franchise agreement, most of the changes dealt with the revenue side of things. We did add a definition of gross revenues, and we did include a 5% of gross revenue fee for wireline services, And that's the same that we provide for other franchise agreements. For example, our franchise agreements with Comcast, RCN, Verizon, our cable providers. So to be consistent with our existing franchises as well as franchises from a number of other jurisdictions throughout the state, we did include a 5% of gross revenues for the wire line providers. There is also a fee of $500 per node for the first installation, and then $200 for each additional node for installations that are not on city facilities. Following the mayor and council's comments at the meetings, we did survey other agreements, mostly those in the state of Maryland, but some of those outside of the state, to look at the initial fees we proposed, and we found that we were pretty much lower than most of the other jurisdictions in the state of Maryland. So we revised the fees to be more reflective of those other jurisdictions. We did add the most favored nations clause that the council requested us to add, as well as a franchise negotiation fee, which we saw in other agreements for Maryland jurisdictions. With regard to the master license agreement, we did in the rent section clarify that the rental fees that we have provided in there are really only for the right-of-way, so that if a provider comes to us and wants to do towers, for example, the ones we have in Kelly Park and other facilities, that those would be separate to separate negotiations. Those would not be subject to the fees in these agreements. Most of the changes were in section 21, which deals with attachments to the city's light poles and traffic signals, so there was a lot of clarification in that section, including the addition of a definition of traffic signals. But we did also address the bonding requirements. That was one of the things that the industry asked us to do. Originally, we'd had a flat bonding fee of $100,000. We reduced that to $20,000 per facility, up to 5 facilities, which would bring us to that $100,000 limit again. So if they only had 1 or 2 facilities, the bonding requirements would be less. If they have a lot of facilities, we also, if they go over the $100,000 mark, we've left that to the discretion of the city manager, which is how we deal with a number of other bonding requirements for other facilities and other sections of the city code. So we've kind of mirrored that language there. So again, as I said in my opening statements, these agreements are intended as templates. When the industry comes forward, we will negotiate with them and address additional comments at that point, and then the agreements will come back to you in their final form for review and approval. So with that, Jerry and I are here to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you both for your work on this, getting us to this point. I'll open it up for questions, comments. Ryan?
I'm wondering if you could just, without necessarily having to go line by line or address every minor comment by industry. I'm looking at the letter from council at Wiley Rhine for Crown Castle that we received today. I'm wondering if staff could sort of just walk through some of the more major commentary or constructive criticism in that letter, and for those items that were not incorporated into the draft and why, and just sort of give the perspective of why some of those things were not adopted.
Okay. The first major comment seems to address towers and the definition of towers.
Yeah.
And we did make some changes to those definitions to address the concerns. Apparently, the industry doesn't think we made enough changes, but we did make some changes. And I think it's really, I guess you might be able to address this more specifically, but we don't believe that their interpretation of the language is certainly what we intend or is correct under the law.
Okay, I mean, that's...
Ryan, could we, I'm sorry, Councilman, could we go into even more detail? So if you just parse the first sentence in that second paragraph.
Yeah.
The franchise agreement continues to propose a flat ban on placement of new wireless facilities in the rights of way.
Yeah.
That's wrong.
Yeah, that's not how I read what we've done. So that was one of my biggest concerns when I saw that.
So I think then, we get to question the credibility of the rest of it. But I mean, if you make a blatant statement like that, then and then they go on to complain about the definition of tower, but they fail to note that the definition of tower comes directly from the FCC's definition of tower in this new world in which we have base stations and towers. And towers are those things that are erected vertically to support FCC licensed facilities. So all we're doing is mirroring the language that you will find Crown and Wiley-Ryan is on record as supporting at the FCC. So we're significantly troubled by both of those. I think the idea that somehow there's something wrong with Gaithersburg treating utility poles different than towers is again, I think it asks for a naive reading by the council. Of course utilities poles are different. They're governed by different rules. Many of them had the rights to be in the rights of way in Montgomery County before Gaithersburg was even incorporated. So we have to treat each of these folks as they come to us, and I think that that's what the franchise agreement and the master license agreement does. The largest criticism, and hopefully we'll have the leadership of the senator down in Annapolis this session. The largest criticism of the industry of local government is that we come in and we don't know what the rules are and we don't know what folks are asking for. Gaithersburg is doing all of that right now and really providing significant leadership. So I think that the allegations or the claims in that paragraph sort of fall. Again, the last paragraph that says, the inability to install new poles where needed, and again, it wouldn't be new poles, it would be new towers. Let's make sure we use the language consistently. New towers where needed will result in gaps in service which is an effective prohibition of service. Well, that's, again, it's just not true. We may not allow them to put a pole up or a tower up in the rights of way, but there's nothing that says that they can't go on a wall that happens to be at that intersection or on a roof that happens to be at that intersection. They want to go in the rights of way because they find that it's cheaper than negotiating with the private sector. And so again, let's call it what it is. We're looking for a fast track. Now, in some cases, that's a great idea for Gaithersburg, right? I mean, we really want to make sure that all of our constituents have the most significant access to capacity, wireless or wireline that they can have. But please don't make the allegation that somehow we're violating federal law, and that would be a violation to prohibit or have the effect of prohibiting.
Could I ask you a question about that point, about the interplay between the franchise agreement and what it permits, what it doesn't permit, and hearkening back to the statutory language that we adopted, where we put the safe harbor provision or the catch-all provision that if there was an effective prohibition, there was an exception. How does that work with respect to the legislative aspect that was adopted and the franchise agreement?
Yeah, I mean, I think with the legislation, yes, certainly we included the safe harbor provision to ensure
safe
that
harbor, that's what I was
to ensure that there was not a violation of the federal regulations. There was not an effective prohibition. Which gives the applicant to come in if they can justify a location that the city would consider that. We think that there is appropriate language in the franchise agreement as well as the master license agreements to address that issue as well, because again, we think that the way that, again, our definition of a tower we took straight out of the FCC language, but we don't believe that that prohibits all installations. Certainly there are existing poles, there are other issues there, and there is, with the ability under the regulatory scheme of both the regulations and the ordinances, the ability to look on a case-by-case basis. So, I mean, I think under the franchise agreement, what we would be looking at when we negotiate those, if they can come in and prove to us that there's no place other than installing new poles, that's something that we would consider and something that we would address through the negotiations.
Okay. But is that something that would be reflected in the agreement? I just want to make sure that we don't put a safe harbor or a carve-out into the legislation, but then close the door on it through a negotiation and ultimately the agreement. I want to make sure they're consistent.
I actually had the exact same question and wanted to make sure that that essentially we're incorporating all of that by reference. I mean, these agreements have to be subject to all the regulations and the code that we passed.
Right, and there is language in the agreement that does incorporate all of those documents into the agreements.
And Councilmen, it is typical boilerplate in any franchise agreement that establishes the superiority of the code. So you would always have that at a minimum to fall back on. I guess there's a section here that says that, but you're silent on additional nodes and on timing. And again, our thought process here was simply to understand what the federal law is and know that there are shot clocks under the federal law, but not incorporate those shot clocks into our own documents. And again, I apologize if there are a number of you that do this on a regular basis, but for others that may not. The idea of why you wouldn't put in the Gaithersburg Code or Gaithersburg Agreement a time frame that is really reflective or incorporating by reference a federal state the timeline is that if the timeline changes at the federal level, you need to come back in and change it, or you may find that you're being more onerous or more generous than you need be. And so that's why we continue to rely on the external shot clocks as a protection for the applicant as well as for the city.
Yeah, so a number of the other comments deal with the fees. And, you know, staff did go back after the last council member meeting because it's something that you all asked us to do, and we looked at other agreements that, particularly that Crown Castle had entered into with other jurisdictions, mostly in the state of Maryland, but we did look at some in other jurisdictions. And we changed our fees to more mirror those fees that we saw in other agreements. So we think that they are, you know, reflective of that. I have had some discussions with Crown Castle as early as today, and if they can come in and show us data where our fees are much higher than, you know, other similar situated jurisdictions, I told them, you know, when we come back with the final agreement, we would certainly look at that and bring that information to you, but at least based on what we've looked at for other jurisdictions, we think that our fees and the structure of our fees is right in line with other Maryland jurisdictions.
Can I ask about that, Lynn, too?
Sure.
I mean, what we're being asked to do tonight is to approve templates, which, as you've said many times, will be tweaked and negotiated as you deal with individual applicants and franchisees. But in the future, if we need to amend the template itself, we could do that as well, as long as
you all can do that at any
as long as we're
time.
careful not to make sure that it doesn't have any sort of discriminatory effect on.
Right, and really the main reason that we came before you with templates at all versus coming back with negotiated agreements is we do want to ensure that we are consistent not only within the small cell industry but also with our existing franchise agreements that we have with other utilities and the cable providers as well as our other utilities, because we don't want to be discriminatory not only within the small cell industry but with our other franchise agreements as well. So we've tried to take, you know, both of those things into consideration as we proceed, and that was, you know, somewhat of the thought process behind the regulations as well, because they dealt not only with the small cell industry, but they also dealt with any use of our public rights of way, because we want to ensure that, you know, any use of our rights of way is consistent and non-discriminatory in nature.
Councilman, if I could just add one other thing, and that is in the classes that I teach around the country on tower management, whether it be traditional towers or small cells, the first point that we make on the transactional side of the ledger is that you need to manage the draft. You know, you need to manage the writing because, again, it's not a great insight here, right? The application or the form that the carrier is going to provide to you is going to be fairly self-serving, and it's not going to address half or a third of the points that you need addressed. So the idea of developing a template just makes perfect sense from a management standpoint, because that way anyone that comes to Gaithersburg starts with your form. And if that means that the parts of it have to come out, then they come out, but they come out knowingly. You voluntarily give those up as opposed to never knowing they were something you should have been thinking about in the first place.
Well, but shouldn't we be seeking to put a template in place that is not very malleable by each person that comes to try to negotiate them? Shouldn't we be trying to put something in place that is more uniform across the board? Is that,
I think that's the goal. I think we're
Okay.
just trying, I apologize.
Yeah, go.
I just want to
No,
make sure that.
That's the purpose of the code, though. That's our
Yeah, I mean, that is the
major
purpose.
document.
Yeah, the purpose of the template is to be consistent, but we do also understand that, you know, it's not completely just a fill in the blank, you know, put name here, and that there may not be other changes based on, you know, particular circumstances.
Yeah.
But, you know, I don't think staff intends to come back with a completely different agreement when we come to final form, though.
Yeah, there has to be some outward limit on how much it can be tweaked and negotiated. Otherwise, the point of having a template kind of fades away. But I don't think we quite yet know what that outer limit is until we actually see something in action and have a better sense of you know, where that limit is. And I'll leave it to staff and other experts to advise us on where they think that limit is. So, and then there were a couple of, I wouldn't call them smaller, but I'd call more granular constructive criticisms in the letter. There was a comment about sort of getting a double hit for the bonding requirement because there's this requirement in both of the different templates. Maybe you can talk to that. Was it intended to be two separate bonding requirements or one? Maybe you can talk a little bit about that.
Yes, because I mean, I think that they do cover different things. I mean, in the franchise agreement, really the intent of the bonding requirement is to address any damages to city property or to other properties that may occur as a result of these installations. Where in the master license agreement, it's intended to address more of the damage to a particular facility, as well as to ensure that we have funds for removal of the facility should the, and I think was the comment that Neil addressed is, you know, should the facility go away. So again, we did hear those comments and we did restructure in the master license agreement to potentially, and again, depending on the number of facilities that they would maintain, to reduce those bonds. You know, again, we think that these bonding amounts are relatively low. They're also consistent with bonding amounts that we've seen for other jurisdictions in the state of Maryland.
Neil.
So far we've addressed the comments both made here at the dais and received in a letter from Crown Castle and their counsel specifically. We also have in the packet today on page 171, beginning on 171, some correspondence that was initiated by the request of County Councilman Elrich to forward our draft legislation over there, and then they shared it with a citizen who made a number of comments. Interestingly, of course, industry thinks that we're too far on one side, and at least in this case, the person drafting this response believes we're too lenient toward industry. But if you could address any of the comments in that note, I'd appreciate it as well. They think that there's inadequate notice and too many exceptions available, and so on and so forth. They also, by the way, there are a number of areas where they thought that the items in our ordinance and franchise agreements were actually great, and that they want to steal some of those for the county legislation. But I thought we should at least address those, because I know that the citizenry has at times turned out and expressed concerns over this whole situation. So I want to make sure that we're addressing that side of the argument as well.
All right, so I'm going to have to pull up the agenda packet here for a second.
Yeah, it's a little challenge learning how to navigate this new system. At least the page numbers correspond between what's printed on the pages and what's in the document as well. That's a new thing for us.
Page 171.
What page did you say it was?
This is
171.
the Spielberg note, right?
Yeah, this pertains to something we've already passed, because we already passed the.
I understand, but I think as we're talking about this, since it wasn't in the packet previously, that we should make sure that we're addressing the concerns that are addressed here.
Yeah, I mean, I do remember looking at this when it came in, and my recollection was most of them dealt with the ordinance and regulations.
This wasn't the only commentary we received.
No,
from
there was a
members
lot
of the
in the-
public.
in the record.
There were a
So,
couple of
yeah.
significant ones,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So do you want us to address the ones with regard to the ordinance and regulations, or only with regard to
If you don't mind, I
the-
think that would be
the
appropriate.
agreement? I think the first, I'm looking at page 172, talks about notice to residents. There was, and I apologize, I don't have the ordinance and regulations in front of me, but there was a provision in the ordinance that did provide some notice to residents. I'm trying to remember off the top of my head. I believe it was within the
500 feet.
the 500 feet,
Yeah.
which was larger. I mean, typically we do the 200-foot area, 500 feet, so that there is an appeal right that is included in the ordinances. So I think we did believe that that was adequately covered. With regard to exceptions, we did believe that, again, this deals with more the safe harbor provisions, that in order to comply with the federal regulations, we did need to have some safe harbor language in there to ensure that we weren't adopting something that would be an effective prohibition of service. Land use standards.
Councilman, if I could just for a second, one of the difficulties that we find ourselves in sometimes when we're talking about the locating of wireless facilities on government property is that we forget that there are two transactions that are taking place. There's one transaction with us as the property owner, and there's one transaction with us as the regulator. The points that are made here with respect to notice to residents and the exemptions and the overrides, each of those are really speaking to us as local government, as regulator. And there we don't have the proprietary benefits that we have as the landowner. So we have to fit within the time frames that have been established by the FCC. And again, who knows, maybe we may see something in Annapolis this year that further crunches those times down. There are two proceedings at the FCC in which the industry is asking that we go from having 150 days for a new location down to 90 days, and from 90 days for a co-location down to 60 days. So the time, the pressure is significant, and you're right. The biggest victim or the most vulnerable area with these timeframes is in fact the public notice. I was actually humbled and honored to go to the FCC with our county executive, and that was Mr. Leggett's lone, or 2 points. He wanted them to do something on RF, and the other thing he wanted them to do was to make sure that they preserve the opportunity for there to be public hearings on the placement of these facilities, whether it be a macro cell or a micro. And so that's something that the county is fighting for as hard as they can. But when you're writing ordinances today, you have to write an ordinance so that it's workable within those timeframes. And so while I'm grateful to the to the member of the public that provided such wonderful detail, it's wonderful detail, but it appears to be not anchored to the obligations and the timelines that you have to meet. Otherwise, you're out of compliance.
All right, that's fair. So there's one other point that they made at the bottom of this page, and then we can move along. But in terms of a point that was made a little bit earlier, in terms of if there's not something available in the right-of-way, there might be some private property that would be available. And this person has some issues with that. If I wanted to rent my roof to a small cell facility, my next-door neighbor might not appreciate that. Is that being addressed in any way? Is that something that we're allowed to address, or is that just, free market in action?
Well, we did, when we adopted the ordinance, we did allow them to be on private properties, but there were a number of setback and stealth components to that in order to protect not only the visual appearance, but the proximity to other buildings and facilities.
That's what I recalled, so I just wanted to make sure that I was getting that correct. So there are protections for this sort of thing built into the ordinance as it stands?
Correct.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Any further questions or comments? Rob?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. The representative from Crown Castle came out again today. He's sitting in the back of the room. He's generously giving his time.
Correct.
Again, he's asking for a step back to address certain things. You know, I was comfortable with the regulations and the ordinances that in moving forward and adopting those. Here, I just wanted to get your opinion because, you know, there's 4 companies that have kind of stuck their head out of the saying we're interested, and Crown Castle happens to be the one that moved forward the most. So if they're coming out and asking about, you know, addressing certain issues in the franchise agreement, do you think, based on the most recent material that we've received, that it would be warranted to take a step back and address those concerns, or do you think those are more things that the framework is there and now we can address those appropriately through negotiations?
Well, I think yeah, certainly Crown Castle submitted the letter on December 18th, and then they obviously submitted the letter today. The comments are fairly similar between the 2 agreements, and we did make some changes to address their comments in December, for the December 18th. And, you know, I think from the staff's perspective, you know, we're certainly willing to meet with Crown Castle or any of the other industry partners and discuss further, but we've already had a number of meetings with them on these particular issues. You know, I don't know that, at least from the staff perspective, that it would result in significant changes to the draft that's before you today, because, you know, after we got the earlier letter, I mean, we did go back and regroup. We did meet with Joe Van Eaton again and looked at their comments and analyzed their comments, and we did make changes to some of the definitions and some of the provisions of the document to address those particular issues. So, you know, I am not sure that based on the letter today, if we did go back, that there would be significant additional changes, at least based on the staff recommendation.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, so you're my expert, Lynn, and Jerry, you're the substitute expert. You're an expert in your own right, but I'm used to seeing Joe up there. I just want to make sure that we're not closing off any avenues for the ability to make things better and to address industry concerns. As long as you 2 are comfortable that whatever the issues have been raised can be addressed through further negotiations after adoption, I'm fine with that as well.
Councilman, can I give you an example? There's a point on page 3. It says, we also question the need for the provision of section 22H of the master license agreement that gives the city the right to require removal of a public street light when the license expires, particularly if the primary purpose of the facility remains providing illumination. Well, some of the facts are getting confused. What we're talking about is our replacement lights or a new light that's being put in. Well, I'm sorry, earlier tonight, I heard you have a whole discussion on how the city's going to lead on energy the management. Now, if this is a new pole that went in, then the engineers didn't feel like there needed to be a light pole there to start with. Well, if the light pole that's also a wireless tower goes away and it's only a light pole, well, you're carrying expenses for that light pole and you're eating energy that ought not otherwise be used. That's the type of thing where, you know, I think if you explain to industry, that's why we want it. And we haven't even gotten into yet the additional risk that every piece of street furniture presents to both the pedestrian and the driving public. It's that many more things to run into. And so if you've got something there that's sort of anachronistic or it's a vestigial, you know, piece of infrastructure, why keep it there if it can provide risk and it's not really providing any additional benefit? And that's the type of overall management that a city has in mind when they're drafting one of these things that perhaps in all fairness to the industry, they may not see because they do see it as being silly. Why do we have to tear it all out? It's still going to serve as a street light. Yeah, but it's a street light that's costing us money and it's increasing our exposure if somebody happens to run into it.
And one of the things I know the reason that we went with the mechanism of the regulations is because they would be fairly nimble to amend in the future versus having to go through the whole ordinance process. these agreements are even more nimble to amend. If we get into the negotiation process and we find that there are certain provisions that, just are not going to work for whatever reason, we always have the ability to come back to you all and ask for revisions.
Anyone else?
Well, so I guess that's the nimble, our ability to be nimble in this, but also have the same starting point for every provider that wants to come in and propose an agreement and a license and request a license. I think that's the important part. But basically, the ruling principles are in our regulation ordinance already. There are going to be different interpretations, and I think that given the templates and the common starting place for everybody else, I think our ability to regard them as template documents and not written in stone allows us to be flexible with each provider that wants to negotiate this, understanding that they have to comply with our basic set of regulations in our code. So I'm comfortable moving forward both the master and the template agreement. So.
Can we can move them in the same?
Yes, we
motion.
just need a motion. There's no resolution, so we just need a motion to approve.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, carries 5-0. Appreciate the phrase vestigial infrastructure.
There you are.
Well done. Well
There
done.
you go. Well, I get to let Joe know I didn't mess up now, so and I will pass his best wishes on. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Next, we have from the city attorney.
I do have two items briefly this evening. Want to thank Council Member Sales for mentioning the BOSE meeting. Unfortunately, it has been rescheduled. It was supposed to be tomorrow evening. We had a little bit of a quorum issue, so that has been rescheduled to January 17th. But we do still certainly encourage the public to come out and attend that meeting. And that notice will be posted on the website hopefully tomorrow. Also, I did want to announce, many of you were aware that PEPCO has filed yet another in their long line of rate increase cases today with the Public Service Commission. They're seeking a $41.4 million rate increase, which would result in an average of a $5 per month additional increase for the average household. So again, I am anticipating that we will participate in that proceeding once again, and we will also try to address the LED lighting for our street lights in that. We made some minor incremental changes in the last case, and hopefully we can make more significant changes where it would actually be beneficial for us to install LED street lighting.
So how often are they allowed to come back and ask for rate increases?
Too often is the
As soon as the prior case closes.
They can ask
and the prior
again.
case concluded at the end of October, so they waited.
So what percentage would that $5 on the average person be? Because I'm pretty sure I have above average electrical bills.
I do not have that because they haven't. I did check to see their formal filing, and it was not yet posted on the Public Service Commission website, but I can get you that information.
What actually be more interesting and useful would be not only that data, but going back a couple
Going
of
back
years.
for like 3 or 4 years.
Yeah,
the
and
total,
seeing
the
how
total
the increase has been.
Yeah, I mean, it's been significant if you put all all of the rate.
Are they
cases
promising
together.
improvement in service and maintenance and increase in resilience of their facilities as part of this rate increase?
I mean, they're justifying it on their actual cost to increase their service.
To increase but not improve their service? I don't understand.
But I mean, it's based on the repairs
More
that they have. The rates are actually based on the costs, their past costs. So their argument will be, and again, I haven't seen their filing yet because it's not been publicly posted yet, but I'm assuming that they're going to argue that the improvements that they've done to date have cost them more than they anticipated, and that's why they need the additional rate increase.
I'm just, it bothers me that their arguments never have to do with providing improved service, more efficient service, and more reliable service as part of their argument, saying that, oh, we already did that, now we're just expanding our service.
Welcome to the complicated world of public utility proceedings.
If they began every request with, we intend to improve efficiency and reliability and service to our customers, that it would be a great place to start, but they never start like that. That bothers me.
I think you should testify at the proceeding.
Happy to
Councilmember
do it on
Sesma.
behalf of the city. And on behalf of myself as a consumer of the product.
All right, we got, good point. All right, do we have anything from any other staff? Not seeing anything, okay. Just a reminder that next week our work session is off-site, 6:30 p.m. at Manna Food Center. Check the city website for more details. Please do join us January 15th on Martin Luther King Jr. Day at Seneca Creek's Community Church on First Field Road. I forget what time it starts, but it's also on our website. And the next regular meeting of Mayor Council will be Tuesday, January 16th. It's another Tuesday meeting because of the Martin Luther King Day holiday. 7:30 p.m. right here. Until next time, let's do great things, Gaithersburg. We are adjourned.